us, you can check us out at starspace46.com. Oklahoma City Java Users Group has been around for, what are we, 11 years now? Something like that. We've got a couple people in here who've been here since longer than me, some of you. So we're happy to keep going. I'm bringing a format back today that we haven't done probably since the Computer Club, I think. It's been a while. It's called Fishbowl. So this talk today is going to be structured a little differently. That's what those chairs in the middle are all about. I'm going to do some content that some of you may be very familiar with already, and some of you may not have seen before, and that's okay. Part of the idea is for me to get a conversation started. So Fishbowl format is a way that we have sort of a voluntary panel. What you do is we have 6 chairs in the middle of the room, and I will explain this again when we're about to do it. The idea is that we have to keep one of them empty, exactly one, programmers. So if there are 2 empty or 0 empty, the conversation has to wait for somebody to volunteer to leave or enter the conversation in the middle. And that way, as people want to participate, they can jump in. And I've broken the content into 2 chunks so that we have 2 conversations about running our software in production. This is the first time I'm delivering this talk. I've proposed it at 200OK. The 200OK is a conference sponsored by the Techlahoma Foundation in June. In Tulsa. I think it's 3rd year, and it's a pretty cool all-day conference about web technology. So this talk I'm going to try it up there too. Well, at least I've proposed it. I have not been accepted, so vote for me. All right, production. You guys know what production is? You think you do? I have another name for the talk. Our software has to run somewhere, right? So, what is production? You think I was going to put the question up and answer it? But let's think about it for a minute. What are some things you think are, and I'll repeat them on the mic for the stream, but what are some aspects you think about a production installation or environment for you?
It's scary.
Scary?
Anywhere besides the developer's laptop.
Not the developer's laptop. The developers don't have direct access to production. Some do. It's optimized for something, yeah. Yeah. So I have a lightning talk I do on this is the title of one of my lightning talks. Some of the qualities of production that I hold dear are not those. Those are all means. The ends of production is users. To me, the only definition of production environment is that users are using it they're using it for something they need to accomplish. So if you download some data out of production into a QA database and you tell a user about it and they run queries against it, guess what? You made another production, in my opinion, right? Because production is just using software to do real stuff, right? And it's the whole reason we write software. If you write software that does not go to production, why did you do that? I hope it was fun. I hope you learned something, because it's not valuable yet. It's not doing any value for other people besides you. Production is when people use your software. And we talk about production environments as sort of the place we make for people to use our software. So thinking about the fact that whether or not you agree with some of these definitions is what the fishbowl's for, right? Because I don't want to stand up here and tell you, I have all the right answers. I want to have this conversation, right? So thinking about having a production environment, we now have to think about operating one. And a lot of times we don't. The Java developers and a lot of developers think about making some software. And there's some other people somewhere who are going to run my software for me, right? Well, we call those operators, and in some of my past lives, I've got to be both the operator and the developer, and when you jam those words together, you get DevOps, right? Some places, they work closely. Some places, they're completely different groups and people, and sometimes they're different companies, right? AWS is operating some of the layers of production for a lot of people now, and that's definitely not on your team, right? But if you think about the human activity that must go into operating production, those people are using your software in a way. They got to do some things to operate it in the production environment for the other users. They're helping you, right? So that's why I picked this picture. The Ferris wheel has an operator and it has a bunch of users. And when you design your Ferris wheel, you got to think about both of them, or else what, people can't get off or get on, or they go too fast, or when they fall out of their chair, what's going to happen, right? So, but when you design a software system, you have to design for both kinds of users, and guess what? They're both users, and one of them has a whole lot of power to affect the other ones. And so it's almost more important sometimes to think about how you design your system to be operated, right? That's why I bring up this topic of production operational features, right? Now, if you think about the interface you're making, you're designing for these production users who operate your system, right? There's really two sort of general categories I break it into, and it's just like every other user interface. There's reading and writing. If you think about it, there's getting information from the environment, and there's imposing your will on the environment, right? And so I'm going to start with Act 1, which is imposing your will. We had a great breakfast yesterday, two guys in here, Clayton and Jeff, talking about configuration, and I sort of thought last night, I rewrote this part. Configuration is a general word we use for the input, I think, that the operations users give to your code. What are they going to tell your code to make it run properly for your users? Now that's part of the definition, but it can help us to divide it up into categories. So I'm going to take these three categories because really settings is like what I would call all of the general configuration stuff, the lowest common denominator, and all the other two can fall into settings, and I'm going to get into each one, how I'm defining each one of them. And I'm throwing these definitions up not as I went out and looked it up and trust me, these are the definitions, but I'm proposing them to see what you guys think and see if we can refine them and make this a more formal pattern language. I went and looked on C2 Wiki. I went and looked on Twitter. I went and looked on Martin Fowler's Blicky, and there doesn't seem to be quite the amount of industry vocabulary around these concepts of software as there are around the design concepts and development and object-oriented and agile. And it seems like operational hasn't had these design patterns written, or I haven't found the book yet. So how can we set these? Really, everybody has a way this happens now. It's not that you have it or you don't, or you need to add it. It's just there's different ways to do it. So if you start with the lowest common denominator and say, well, that's not good for me because X, Y, and Z, that lets you lead yourself into what design should be done, right? To make what's sensible to add to your system. So if you start by saying, forget it, I'm going to put constants all over my code, right? And then you're like, well, that's going to make it hard for this reason or that reason. Now you've talked yourself into having configuration settings. I don't know how many times I've been in some code and been typing something and be like, this feels like it should be a configuration setting, and just kind of mindlessly, okay, make a key value, put it in my config file and move on. I didn't go through a very methodical process of deciding, yeah, this one should be configuration or this one should not be configuration. I just sort of went on gut instinct, right? Well, now I look back and it's really a matter of the change. Something might not be a constant if it needs to change more at a different time than your source code changes. I'm going to propose that as one reason you might make something a configuration setting, right? It changes at different times. You might also consider it's changed by different people. Maybe you don't have the power to change the host name of the database server. Maybe you don't want that power. Maybe some other team does that. Well, that's a good reason not to hard code it, right? Maybe its value shouldn't be public or saved in your source control system or known to you at all, right? That's another reason you might have something not be a constant that you need to provide to your code to run in production, right? And then also, when you change that value, then what? Does your code need to be restarted? Does your code fall completely apart? Does your code, just part of it need to change, or does it just work? One thing I loved when I first got into development, I first got into development a lot of times. When I first got into web development, I decided to try PHP out. I was on a desktop support job in 1999. I loved that I could just change all these different things and do nothing. And somebody loads my web page and they're just changed. That was great to me at the time. Now we may not love that so much. At the time, I thought that was just fantastic. I don't have to recompile, I don't have to deploy, I just do, okay, it's done, right? So that might affect some things in different stacks, especially Java, right? We've got layer upon layer of build, package, release, deploy. When I change it, then what? What gets changed, right? So these are the considerations I think come into play when talking about operators providing input to your program, right? And I took out all of my answers to these questions so we could have a fishbowl. I have some ideas, but first, let's talk about just settings in general and try to give them a some more useful definition and name while we have our conversation. So there's a couple ways we could define configuration settings. Some of them may be more useful than others. I think it's part of the user interface for the operator. These are what goes the form fields of the user interface for the operator. Some of the things I sort of think make them unique is that different applications might share the same one, like your database hostname, and they might be different between different environments that your application runs in. That's why you don't hard code them. So that might be one aspect of what a configuration setting is. Changes at a different pace than your release, right? Sometimes, Jeff reminded me of this yesterday, sometimes your setting will be the same for 7 releases and then change 3 times during one release for some reason. Whether it's like the username for some system and somebody keeps, oh, we're gonna make a group now. Oh, now you're gonna have to put the prefix on there. You know, so it's the rate of changes doesn't match up to application release, and you don't wanna be forced into releasing your application every time. And then it also changes at a different pace than application execution. There's no reason to restart your app if you don't have to, right? So it's not that every time your app restarts, it's going to get a new value of one of these things. It's a separate concern. So I think these are some of the things that define configuration settings. I probably missed some, so it'll be a good conversation. Okay, so there's some things we often do with configuration settings over and over again. Just having the idea of settings gets us somewhere, right? Well, one thing we commonly do with our configuration settings is we figure out what other software to go call, right? A lot of times our service, our application needs to get to a database or call a web service or go to a FTP server somewhere and it's got a host name, right? So when we see in DevOps, you see this term service discovery a lot. That's all it is. I'm some code and I need to have some service from some other code. How do I get to that, right? So that's why I kind of put these 2 examples up here so you can think of it in terms of your user interfaces. If you're a piece of software, you need something, or if you're in my case, if I wanted to go home, I don't care who brings what car. I just say, hey, Uber, I want to go home, and a car shows up, right? Service discovery is kind of like that. You don't say the URL. You could put a setting in that has the URL to a web service, right? Or you could give your code away to say, hey, I need a service that does X, and you get one, right? It's dependency injection at runtime, right? That's what service discovery is. And then there's another side of it, of course, is publicizing those services. So guess what? We didn't just invent this. When we made up the word DevOps, there are 2 ways that we've been doing it for years. Plain old settings and DNS, right? Hey, Linux sysadmin, could you go change the database host name and properties file and /etc/ something? I just did service discovery. It's not a very efficient way, but we did that forever. DNS is another way to do a certain kind of it. So say the database server changes and somebody just updates the host name in DNS. I just keep using the same host name. I'm discovering my database server, but I'm not having to change anything in my code. That was a little better than asking the sysadmin, right? So this is already there, and we don't even stop using these in the new world. There's some more ways that we do it now, especially in the Java world. There's this Netflix open source service called Eureka. We call that client-side service discovery, where the client has access to a service registry, and it says, I need a service that gives me my inventory database, and the registry comes back and says, here's where it is. And then we call it, but you have to put code in your client to do that, right? Another one is a server-side service discovery. DNS is an example of that, but DNS doesn't always give you, it does good for names to IPs, and it even has SRV records that sort of let you do ports too. But something like a console will do much more rich, like I'll give you a URL. I'll give you a full way to get, or I'll give you a set of URLs you can choose from, right? So server-side service discovery is you send the server the logical name of what you want, and it gives you back the answer, rather than with Eureka, you have to do the lookup yourself against the registry, and that's what Eureka does. Then there's competitors. You combine etcd with SkyDNS. That's a way that they've added on to the DNS subsystem. These are open source options for doing the same thing. There's another one called SmartStack. A lot of the JavaScript community, for some reason, is using that one, and the Ruby community. Then Kubernetes is a container framework that's got answers for a lot of these questions, but they're very opinionated. So in Kubernetes, it has however it does the service registry part, and you can tell it, I want environment variables or I want DNS, and it'll do that for your application, right? So these are ways you can solve the service discovery problem for yourself. Understand that each of these also has it has the requirement to, your application can look up what it needs, and it also has the requirement of somebody has to tell it where things are, right? And so they usually have features for self-registration. My application came up, my application offers an inventory web service, version 2 or something. Hey, console, I'm up, here I am, this is what I do. And then all the other ones can find me, right? So that's what service discovery systems kind of do. Another category of settings are secrets. So we've done those before too, standard ways, right? I generated that one just for the presentation. All along, a lot of us are doing these already, right? We either just hard code them in a constant, stick them in a plain old settings file, or we set an environment variable, or we make a special secret directory on the Linux server and only let root have read access to it and put a file in there. That's okay. That's a way of doing secrets, right? There's some more stuff on the table now. We've got HashiCorp, who made Consul. They have this thing called Vault, and it provides secrets sort of at runtime in a cryptographically secure way. It's my favorite one so far. Another open source one, Kubernetes, again, has its own built-in secret store, and unfortunately, to your app, it just looks like environment variables or files once your app runs. But your app is in a container, so maybe files aren't so bad. That's part of the conversation we're in right now. And then there's another one called Keywhiz, which is provided, I think, by SoundCloud, actually. I think it was SoundCloud. It's another open source secret management solution, and they all have opinions about why they're better or worse. But these are the open source alternatives. There's also a couple of commercial alternatives I found that look pretty awesome, and they're more general secret management for your enterprise. So they'll have the application secret management stuff, and they also have like people password safes for people to use in user interfaces and deprovisioning and stuff like that. So CyberArk is kind of the industry leader according to the B-Sides OK people who I talked to on Techlahoma Slack. They said CyberArk's the best one. I think CyberArk knows it because I called them and asked them about pricing. But it looks good. And then Conjur I found over the weekend digging around. It looks like a pretty strong contender too. It's a software as a service one. I'm not sure everybody wants to use software as a service for secrets, but they do that too. So these are ways you can solve the problem for your company. And I put them all up here so that when we all sit down, we can, oh, I'm using this one, I'm using that one. I tried this one and it's good or bad, right? So again, that's what I've got. I throw the ball up and hope everybody swings at it. The way this fishbowl discussion works, again, just on configuration this time, is I'm looking for 5 people all the time and 1 chair empty. So, and I'm gonna be the Geraldo. I'm gonna walk around with the microphone. It means I'm not sitting. So what I'm hoping to hear from people is both aspirational, I'd like to be doing things a certain way at my place, or actual, like we're actually doing things this way and it works well or it works poorly, or even like historical, like we used to do something like this and it worked well or it didn't. So just real stories about how you guys are, everybody's solving these problems somehow, right? So that's what the fishbowl discussion's for. I'm gonna time it for 15 minutes. So please have a seat in the middle and we'll get this started. And I have some questions I can spur the conversation with once we have volunteers to be on the panel.
You have a high
Yeah. And then the other deal with it is anybody can stand up out at any time. Somebody else has to come take their seat before we can continue the conversation. And if someone gets into a seat, then someone volunteers to leave. All right, here we go. Oh, well, can't go yet. Yeah. So first of all, let's just go around and just introduce name, company, and something you want to say about yourself.
Matthew Riley, I work at Interworks, and I also on the board and an officer of Techlahoma.
Mitch Blevins, work at Climate Control Group.
I'm Aaron Krause. I work at Clever. I am the code boss.
John Pettigrew. I also work at Clever.
Joe Shelton, headhunter.
Mitch says, let's find out how Clever does things. So you're Clever.
We just hard code everything. It kind of depends on a project by project basis. We've used Vault for one of our projects that was heavily Dockerized. It was in a microservice environment. We have a big Rails project, which the go-to default is kind of these environment variables, which we've done that, and they've all been successful. I'll let John talk about our other projects.
Yeah, typically we just use, for the most part, environment variables. I mean, obviously we've had hard-coded stuff temporarily just to get stuff up, but yeah.
If it gets quiet, I'll jump in and ask a question. You guys may also ask questions. So let's see. So right now, on some projects any of you guys are on, who besides the developers ever has to set up how production works? Has to set in some kind of settings, service discovery, or secrets? Let's start with Interworks. Pass it around.
Yeah, so we have products, commercial products that we sell. So we, have installers and stuff like that that we install on servers for our clients. And so it would be the sysadmin's responsibility to make these setting changes. And we typically are not as fancy as some of these things that you discussed. We have environment variables, and then mainly we use configuration files for our settings. And so that's it.
So we've kind of isolated ourselves to where the developers are doing almost all of that. The sysadmins through wildcard DNS, normally that's what you need them for, is some kind of DNS setting. But deployment, we're using Docker, Vault, and deployment, you put something out there and you have a Docker flow proxy that gets your DNS to go to the right place. Or for external services, we have a DNS machine that you point to the right places for things that need to be accessed from the outside, although most things are internal to a company, so we have different needs probably than an external one. And so one of the things we've done is tried to make it so that we're somewhat independent of infrastructure group being able to, needing them to be able to change things because the rate of change is so quick.
Being a pretty small company, we have a whopping 7 employees. We are the developers, the production managers, you name it, we do it. So as far as that goes, it's kind of however we build it. I lost that train of thought. I wanted to ask a quick question though. Going back just to plain old configuration files, what are the common files that, I know we've kind of talked about environment variables and using Vault and other tools here, but going back to the quote old days, I don't know, like I know I've used INI files in projects in the past. We tend to use Grunt and Gulp. We're a heavy Node shop, so we use a lot of JavaScript, so we use JavaScript tools. We've used that in the past. What other configuration files do you guys use? I mean, going back to a different methodology.
So at Interworks, we're primarily a Microsoft shop, and most of our stuff is written in .NET. So our configuration files now are typically JSON files that we read in, and previously they were XML files, so your typical app web config type stuff.
So we have kind of a layer. I know all the cool kids are doing YAML. But but you did mention Jundy as a configuration file. For service discovery, we actually have Java apps that are using JEE that they're looking up values from Jundy. Now, of course, now you look into the layers that you get into because we're running these application servers in a Docker file so it's getting environmental variables are passing in, running a script when you start up the container that puts them into Jundy. And then, of course, we're using Vault to pass into the environmental variables. Docker secrets is something new with the latest release that may prevent us, because now you have all these secrets in the environmental variables that you can see at runtime, but at least we're not sticking them in images. So it's a layer as you pass it from one layer to the next, and each layer has its own advantages. The desire is to get to where we have these Docker images that we can run, and you can look and see everything it needs just from looking at the environmental variables.
So let's do a little aspirational with our last few minutes. What hurts about managing these systems? What hurts about setting things up and configuring them? And where would you like to next move your shops? And also, if you know some of your clients, what they're complaining about.
I only wish there was a sysadmin here in the room today to talk about their side of the things, just because I talked to a lot of system managers, and that's a butting heads between the two of them. And I know there's a lot of, Oklahoma's predominantly Microsoft, so a lot of VMware and VMware Orchestrator where they love setting up those templates and you just have to use it or die kind of thing. But yeah, I still think you guys are all unique, that most of you are small shops. The bigger community out there is very compartmentalized, and it is very much segmented. And there's still a lot of places that everything's just in one Excel spreadsheet on the, on storage, and that's where you get everything. Or worse yet, I talk to places where it's all with one person, and that person holds all the keys to the kingdom. So, yeah, only wish we had a sysadmin in here to give you their side of it.
I would say I haven't personally run into any giant area of pain, but I will say one kind of annoying thing that it's just the nature of the beast, I think, is these keys you're trying to store are ideally pretty secret. They're valuable information. So how do you keep it secure while making it easy for other developers to access them? So even if we were using private GitHub repos, private Docker images, you kind of don't want to store that information in there, so you don't commit it. You don't put it. You may or may not add it onto an image. So we, for example, store some of our secure keys. We'll have them as environment variables or in Vault or something, but on top of that, we store it in 1Password or something. So that's still kind of that makes it easier to communicate with other developers, especially if we have a team account and everything. But if we didn't have that, I don't know what would we do? Like, how would we get this information to a new developer and to a new project in a secure manner? That's one area that I kind of find is not hardened as the best way to do it. And I want to tag someone in here.
Two seats.
Well, okay, so sorry. The one thing that hasn't been brought up yet, probably because everybody's pretty small, but how do you deal with when somebody leaves the company? Like, if you don't have a good way of managing access to secrets and everything, do you have to expire the group secret and all that stuff? So like, that's an interesting conversation to have, is how do you handle transitions within the company and dealing with secrets about people?
Well, it's a pain in the butt, and Vault has a good story for that, but I don't know. My experience is that it's just a lot of ceremony just to get some passwords. So I have 5 different secrets I need for this app to run, and it's like, crap. Now I just want to run it locally with some slightly different things. So the layers is, where we set that up is where Vault gets the secrets, puts them in the environment. But if you put something in the environment manually, it overrides what's there. So you can always set up your local ones. The other thing is this on the service discovery. So you have a location of some well-known service that you're going to go to, and if you run Swarm, you're able to override that locally and just deploy, because you want to test environments is what we haven't talked about here, but you want your test environment that doesn't look at the production database, but looks at a copy of the production database that you're also deploying. And so swizzling that out automatically via the combination of DNS and secrets in the vault is confusing, especially for newbies coming into it.
So on both of those, I think we've gotten into a little bit of settings automation stuff. Part of why we do service discovery and secret backends in Vault is that you're making the operator's life better by making them not have to configure anything, making the software configure itself a little bit, your whole system, right? So with Vault secret backends, it'll provision a password when the app starts and then destroy it when the app stops. So no, you don't have to save it anywhere. And with service discovery, you write the application setting appears when the other service is available and disappears when it's not, right? So part of what I think we're getting to is the user interface of configurations of production configuration, making it have some of the same niceties that convention over configuration had in Maven and other systems like that. So do you guys, before all of these tools, or if you're using these tools, like have you started to try to make your environments self-configure in any ways?
No.
So Brent didn't make it here, Brent Vaughn. So he did some magic work to where we can, check a project out and you branch it in Git. And when you check in to your remote branch, it automatically builds it and deploys it to an environment under that branch name. So you want to be able to change something and give a URL to somebody and say, hey, go try this out. And so that's kind of neat in that you don't have to do any work to set that up, because when you do have to do some work, you end up not doing it. So that's kind of magic, and I'm glad he did that. It's not completely automated as far as the swizzling, as I said, but for the most part, the stuff he's working with here has read-only to production, and so that happens kind of automatically. But just standing up an environment, I think, is a big deal.
For another question. 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes? So the other question is, I guess, we don't make all the software that runs. Those of you, I mean, when you really think about what your software runs with in production, everybody who's done Docker, everybody who hasn't done Docker but they did WebSphere, everybody who did .NET with IIS, you have to configure software that you didn't write. And it doesn't play with the rules you made up. IIS, you have to click in screens or use PowerShell, right? Nginx has its own special config file, and HAProxy has a different one, right, Clayton? And then, like, even the operating system, if you want to set up IP tables rules or Windows Firewall, like, there's layers and layers of configuration that need to be set that you don't get to design how the configuration works. So how have you grappled with that problem?
So I've been living in that world lately. So I've been doing Terraform and Chef, and Terraform forces you to use, like, they have this is how we handle secrets. It's these TF-vars file, and then Chef has the server, which has, like, what is and isn't okay to put on the server and all that. So they're all very opinionated, and I don't have a good solution for working around those things yet. So that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to come today. So if anybody has any good ideas for handling those things, especially in the Chef world, better or good practices, I'm happy to hear them.
Somebody come sit down.
Yes. So actually, I'm at Osberg. I'm Dylan Forsha. So we use Salt, which is kind of similar to Chef, and it's got all sorts of macros that you can create that can go and swizzle whatever type of file that you have. So you could write a different macro for each kind of configuration file and kind of distill it down to a similar language at that point. Just fill in the blanks at that point for that particular service that's external, and figure out exactly how you want to fill in the blanks there.
I'm going to swallow my pride here for a second and ask, what is Swizzle?
Oh, one thing out for another. It's not a technical term. I don't think I made it up.
So what is swizzle was the question, and the answer is to change things out for one another, not a technical term. That's all I got. Yeah, I learn something every day.
All right, thanks. We're going to go on to the next part of the user interface for operators. So appreciate the fishbowl. Be ready for the next one. We're going to have one at the end. Now, this is kind of like a college class. This was the midterm. The final is all of the stuff from the whole thing, right? So if more ideas come from this, we get to talk about them again. And hopefully we'll have to put less questions. So if Act 1 was configuration, input, user interfaces have two things, input and output. Production applications have output that the operators need to use in order to do their jobs, even if they're you. Right, and so I decided to call that observability. Don't look on Martin Fowler's blog. I just did that last night. So I'm coming up with a word for it. Maybe we can start to form a pattern language, but we don't have one that I found yet. So I'm calling it observability because you want your application to be friendly for somebody to run in production. That's what I'm getting at. It needs to emit the information and it needs to be easily accessible. So if you think about user-centered design and UI design for users, we always naturally, how do I group information? What screens do I put it on? How do I make stuff visible that's important and accessible that's not so important, right? We think very hard about that as software designers and developers. Same thing with the inputs, right? We don't think about it so often for the user community, even if it's ourselves, that manages our software in production. Packaged software vendors might do a better job of it than some more service software vendors or software services companies. So I'll be interested to hear if you guys do. Here's some of the categories I decided to put up here of breaking down observability into different categories. I had one, which is the observation that I've kind of pulled out. Monitoring is the ability to automatically observe all of these things, but I didn't think it kind of fit into this category of observability. So in order to allow people to observe your software, there are some things that we do commonly, and there's things we could do, right? And so just like configuration settings is kind of like the lowest common denominator of putting information, I think logging is pretty much the lowest common denominator of emitting information. Your software has input, your software has output, right? From an operational perspective, it does too, and this is the most common output of every piece of software. And when this is deficient, you find yourself in a debugger, right? So logging is what every program does this to emit information for operators, even if it does none of it, right? And a lot of programs have ways, if you think back to Unix, of passing in flags to make it emit more and more logging information. I'm going to propose that logging is best used afterwards to go back and see what happened, right? Its best use is to go look back in time and see how things actually went, rather than, although it's possible, looking right now to see how things are going. Sort of different things users need to do, right? And operators, especially when we get into, you know, we act like microservices is this new thing, and now we're going to have lots and lots of applications to manage. I've been in enough companies with some of you who already 10 years ago had lots and lots of applications. They just were lots of big ones. So this problem's existed for a long time. You need to operate an environment with many different pieces of software in it and know what's going on with all of them. And when something isn't what you like, then you got to go see why. So when nothing else, you go to your logs or your Windows Event Viewer, right? That's the last thing. Maybe there's better things to do. But it's an opportunity too. Every one of us who's written logging statements, I don't know if you've realized this when you're writing them, some of us have, I have this emotional moment where, hey, I'm talking to the sysadmin right now. I'm telling that person a message at a time of crisis, or sometimes just at a time of curiosity, right? I'm getting to talk directly me to that person. That's great, you know. So it's an opportunity for direct communication to that person. So every time you just catch an exception and say log.error E, you're wasting that opportunity. That person's just going to see bleh in Java, right? How many lines of cause by exception stack traces have you had to tear through going back and looking at a production application? That's not a great UI. That's all I'm getting at. It's not a UI. It's a usable one sometimes, a lot of detail. So if we're thinking about maintaining, we're providing software to people who have to run our software with other software, or even we're providing several pieces of software to someone who will run it all together. One aspect of that user interface that makes it more usable is if they don't have to figure out how to read it every time. If it's pretty much the same every time they open up the file, right? And guess what? The Unix guys solved this 50 years ago. I don't know if it's that long, but with syslog, they made a common format already that we arrogant Java developers decided we know better. But so now our stuff looks different than Unix stuff, surprise, and it runs on a lot of Unix systems. But if you can make it consistent, self-consistent is first. If you're going to make 3 applications, please don't come up with 3 different logging formats, right? JSON and strings, or dates that have the year first, and dates that are in a different time zone. We see that a lot, right? So self-consistent is probably the first goal to reach with your software you're going to make for people, and then consistent with whatever else they have. There's a selflessness to it. Just because I'm making the software, if I'm deploying it to an environment, and I've run into this where their logging is all in database tables, and I don't like that, so what? I don't like that. That's how their other stuff is. Make it compatible, because that's where their operators are going to go look at it. It's not about what I think is best, it's about what works best for the people who are going to run the software. So when I say consistent, I don't mean enforce consistency on everybody you know. I mean aspire to consistency where your software is going to run. That's what I'm getting at. And then when I'm talking about consistency, the lowest level of that is format, right? But beyond format, when you use a word, a user, an error, a severe, critical, or when you refer to a business entity, you be consistent with your vocabulary, both with the words you use for things and how specific you're going to be. You don't want in one error to say SQL error 1092 table does not exist, and then the next error to say user not found, right, in the same log file, because that's way different levels of abstraction. So if for one case you're trying to give them useful information for error diagnosis, and in another file you're trying to give them detailed information for error resolution, right? Do that separately and with separate vocabularies, because you're thinking of what the user is going to do with it, not just getting to a point in your code where I got this error, what do I do with it? Psh, chuck it to the logger. That's not a user interface. That's just stopping thinking at the wrong time, right? So when I'm saying consistent format and vocabulary, that's what that's about. Occurrence is more of a subtle thing. I do a lot of integration software, and even DevOps software, which is behind the scenes and invisible. So logging ends up being more of a primary user interface for me than a lot of things that have front ends. But in any case, if you don't put logging in at the same place every time, if some of your services have logging every single step, and some of them have it on the in and the out, and some of them have it just on the in, and some of it have it just on the out, when somebody goes and reads the logs, it's a lot of trouble for them to make sense of it, and they have to open my source code. So when I say consistency of occurrence, I just mean if you're going to log at the beginning, do it every time, please. Right? That way, when the person's looking at 10 services and they see that, when they see the absence of a log on one of them, they know that that means it didn't run, not that you didn't choose to put logging in that one, right? So this is about running a bunch of software together. So consistent format, vocabulary, and occurrence is a good way to make the logs useful by who's operating your software, and a lot of times that'll end up being you. So make it easy on yourself. So lowest common denominator, in my opinion, is logging, and I hope to hear other opinions too. Now let's talk about why people need to see information out of your application. One of the easiest sort of add-on value outputs you can have in your program is about health. If you think of somebody managing a bunch of different software in an environment, which with microservices, that's going to happen to smaller and smaller environments, right? Some of the entry-level stuff they need to know is the software healthy? Is this thing working, right? You need to know that, they need to know that. You got 7 things, and one of them turns orange or red. Now you know where to look, right? Well, in order to enable that, you want a consistent API for health across all the applications. Do I have any fans of Spring Actuator in here? I don't know, I didn't see the team I thought was coming. Actuator is this thing you can turn on in Spring Boot applications that automatically makes a health endpoint. And it's okay, it's not bad, but it's very verbose and detailed. Some of you may be on the stream. But it's almost like log E and let the stack trace pop out, because you're not thinking about the health information you're presenting. You're just saying, well, the framework does something. Let's just turn that on, right? If you think about, you've got an enterprise and they're going to run a bunch of stuff, you want as many things as possible to expose their health in the same way, so that you can then measure the health of all of them in the same way and keep track of if things are working. I would also suggest that there's more than one meaning of health, and it helps you to be consistent with what the health implies. And that's why I put these three buckets here. Is the service okay at all? If the service is injured or hurt or down, it probably needs someone to intervene or some software to intervene by restarting it or redeploying it or notifying somebody, right? But when it's on its way up, it's not down yet, but it's not ready to be used. And so there's these two different sort of Boolean things. One is, I'm in trouble and need help. And one is, I'm ready, send me traffic, right? And the reason we want those separately is that they're used completely differently. In a network of services, you want to know if I can start, if I'm adding something to the list, I can start actually sending it requests, right? And a lot of the load balancers and stuff in microservice environments need that. And that's the good to go or the readiness measure. Kubernetes calls it readiness. SE4 is this standard for these metrics. They calls it good to go. That usually comes after okay. Okay is what you would want to keep watching. You turn a service on, and suddenly it stops being okay. It's probably, it might recover itself, but you might want to give it some attention. It might need you to come fix it. And then if it's not okay, why is it not okay? And when I put developer-defined indicators up here, this is the real gold that you're offering. Is you walk into a software shop as a new employee, or you walk into a part of your software that nobody's touched in 8 years. When it's down, why is it down? Like there's knowledge that the developer had about what this application needs in order to function that's hard to go recover because you weren't there, or it's been a long time, even if it was you, right? So stuff like, I need this database to be up, and I need a table to exist in it, or I need to be able to log in to this web application, right? The developer knows without much effort these little things, check, my application's working. Why not put them in code? You can put them in your health check endpoint. And if there's a consistent way that you expose those, and you have 50 services, and they have check on all of them, and one little check mark goes dark, that you just saved a whole lot of time figuring out what needs fixing. Oh, my Salesforce.com password expired, right? I don't have to go dig through logs, right? So a lot of the good news here is we're not inventing this most of the time anymore. There's 3 or 4 either standard by proxy, by fiat, like the Spring Actuator one, or SE4, which is a standard a company called Beamly published, or Kubernetes standards. You just pick something and use that standard all the time, and you have a way to express it in a way that's likely to be followed by after you. Other software that other people write might actually match up because you're not just inventing something. So exposing health is good. Health is a subset of what I call telemetry. I don't just call it telemetry. A lot of people use this word. There's more you want to know than just, is my application healthy, right? Think of well, I put an airplane, but think about like even your car. How fast am I going? What's the speed limit? Right? Those are two completely different types of telemetry. One of them is, this is a metric that this application defines that's useful. If I make an application that's job is to handle password resets, how many passwords were reset? How many of those passwords did the person log back in and actually, how many password reset requests were received, and how many users came back and used them? Those are little numbers you can count pretty easily that tell somebody outside your application that it's doing its job. So more than I'm healthy, people are using it, and they're not much work. Right? We're writing the application. We know best which things to count. And so I'm not even saying to add a lot of them. Just figure out what would go if you were driving this car, what goes on the dashboard. A couple of little indicators, right? And then I suggest, and I haven't seen a lot of this in the literature yet, that each of those numbers, well, not each of them, some of those numbers has a line that goes with it. I think the InterWorks folks do a lot of that in BI. Like, you don't just want to have a number. You want to know where that number, is that high? Is that low? Is that very high? So for things like requests per second, there's actually an acronym RED, which is requests per second, errors per second, and duration of request that a lot of people are using. If you just start out by saying, count those things about whatever business meaningful thing my service is doing, that's probably a good start, right? And that way you can say, wow, duration is up to 2 minutes for a password reset. Why is that? So I'm suggesting we also add a little capacity indicator in there that says, you know what, I'm going to expose what my request per second is and then have like a maximum request per second. And that means go make another instance of this. I'm running out of room. I'm gonna consume all my memory or something. We know that as developers. I'm trying to communicate from developers to operations. I know some things about how this app needs to run. Why not put them in the app for the person to look at in a consistent way? So when I talk about system observability, I'm really talking about the ways that you expose what production needs, in a meaningful way and a usable way for those users as part of the whole operations user interface. So 12:30, we've got about 10 minutes. This will be a little bit of a shorter one, but I'd like to do another fishbowl, please, and see what you guys do about observability. And then we'll close up the meeting. I'll sit in one of the chairs to get started.
I'm Brent Wilkins. I work for Hobby Lobby Corporate.
Jeff Bowman, I work for App Innovation.
We've all been introduced.
So talking about observability, in our applications, all of our applications log, right? So we all write log files. We're consistent as well in our format. Everything is logged in a JSON format. I would say this topic has come up here in the recent past for us. So one of our newest products is a monitoring solution that monitors another application, right? And so we also have, from time to time, issues with our software, and we need to be self-monitoring. So how do we make that not where we make it that we look bad because we're monitoring another system, but still a way that makes it accessible for the sysadmin or whoever is using our software, right? So we've come up with a way of kind of coming up with subtler, radiators, right? Saying that there's issues with our system, so that might be something within our actual application itself that tells them that something's going wrong and they need to go check it out type thing. So that's what we're investigating right now. We're in the very infancy stage of doing that, but like I said, consistently we do just regular logging to the log files and also event logs.
I'll actually take it back. So I've worked on a couple of different projects. One project, we wrote everything to JSON similarly, right? But it was all in a log, it was in JSON format in a log file. And then we used Splunk to go dig through all that stuff. And that sort of helped us write queries for, oh my gosh, there's a dashboard on Splunk said this was taking forever, how the heck come? And then we'd go find a particular record and then start tracking it through. And then we also had standards with regard to when we would log things. On the start of an execution of a particular thing and at its end, in the middle. So in between those two things, we also had things like, well, if we changed something in certain ways, we had to log that statement. Not every single change, but very specific kinds of change. Anytime we went outside of that to something else, right? Like for example, we were doing a web service call or something, we had to log that we're doing a web service call right now, and it's going over there. All of those things, showed up inside of our Splunk, and we used that for figuring out what we were going to do. And we had a very specific format as well, right? It was, well, be unto you if you didn't follow the format. It was kind of bad. On a different project that I work on, exact same thing, right? We still use Splunk, we do logs. It's not in JSON format, it's standard log file format, but we have about 2 or 3 different tools that are custom tools that we use for logging. And so you use this custom tool and you give it your information, and behind the scenes it figures out all the other things, correlation IDs, transaction IDs, stuff like that. Automatically does date and time stamps and stuff like that. So the only thing that the developer is providing is text, right? An error occurred, oops. here's the caused by text or whatever that goes with that particular thing, or some context around an error occurred. The error is getting thrown into the log file as well, but here's some context that comes right before the stack trace. So all that's done with the standard logging tools that we have that are all internal. Those are some things. And then, of course, those have start and end markers as well. So we have a start and end marker, and then in progress, and then various stages that this particular thing can go through, whether it was I'm starting, I'm reading from a source, I'm writing to a target, I'm jumping on a queue, I'm jumping off of a queue, those kinds of things all get logged. So all those kinds of things we are doing. So on the first one, we had to manually deal with the JSON log format. On the other one, we have tools that do that format for us, but we have to use the tool. So in both cases, we're just using Splunk to dig through things. That's what's worked for us.
Yeah, we use a tool too to log our stuff. So we basically have to do the same thing, right? We pass a reason and then the exception, and it takes care of all the, you know, the niceties of the timestamps and stuff like that. My question is, do you guys constantly log everything, or do you have some type of filtering that you allow the sysadmin? So when I say filtering, like different level, right? So you have your info warning, fatal, that type stuff. So could you answer?
Yeah, we do that. Most everything is info level, and there are specific times that we will use these tools to log things. You're allowed to log things outside of those tools, but those aren't captured. They basically go to the ether. I mean, they'll show up in your console as you're debugging through things. So that's nice as a developer because they don't actually show up in the log files. Once this thing gets to an environment, whether it's the QA environment or the production environment. But then, yeah, for all of our exceptions and stuff like that, we have different severity levels. If we know the exception is recoverable, it's just a warning. If it is not recoverable, it's an error. In some cases, we'll actually, I've seen cases where we do both. That's really totally confusing about what just happened here, because it was one of those, it might be recoverable, but we've looped now enough times that we have decided it is not recoverable. And so we throw the error. So we'll warn several times and then it will fail completely. So yeah, we do have different levels of severity. Almost everything is info level. We do have a couple of places where we use trace, but those are infrequent, and those mostly cross application boundaries because we're watching a particular piece of data as it flows across multiple applications through a reader, across a queue, to another reader, to a writer, to another queue. I mean, and that has to keep consistency there. And so we use trace for those markers, and that's just a marker that says I'm watching this particular thing.
So I hear a lot about style sheets. Is this stuff that should be in a style sheet for developers?
Maybe I would call it more part of like architecture. Like it might be a useful thing for an architecture group to define, like a style guide or even an operations guide that says when you make stuff for my enterprise, if you're a vendor or an internal team, you start defining what do we want consistent. I'm not selling right now. Thanks, Joe. You're hired. Yeah, I think I don't mean this part of this presentation is aspirational. Like logging and settings is what most people do, whether they're files or environment variables and just log files or rsyslog. So what I'm trying to do is put some words around what we're trying to do with them, right? And so when I say capacity, like that's something I haven't seen anybody ever do. So I'd like to start finding a way to do it. Is really why I wrote that part. Hi, Clayton. You haven't introduced yourself either.
Clayton Flesher, I work at Hague Software. Something that didn't get mentioned today that I was a little bit surprised by, and I'm not sure where it fits in, I think it fits in maybe on both, is documentation. You know, some of the things you talked about and at the end is making your expected outputs kind of self-documenting by setting things like maxes and stuff like that. But documenting where you should be able to find the log files, because if your application doesn't get set up properly and logging doesn't get set up properly, they don't spend hours trying to track down logs that don't exist. Documenting just a lot of that kind of stuff, there's, I don't know, just documentation seems to me like something that could fit in here as something that really, both within the team and for sysadmins as well, good documentation makes things so much easier for them to track when there is a problem. And also, I mean, just finding out if there's a problem at all is going to be part of your documentation. And also, when you do have a problem, having a reasonable place to start looking for what is the expected outcome here, and that kind of thing.
That's a good point. All of our log files are documented in the configuration file.
Exactly.
Sorry. All right, well, I'm glad we brought Fishbowl back. Thank you, everybody, for volunteering and sort of stepping out when you thought I was giving a presentation. I made you do one. I appreciate that. My point in this conversation is that I thought I'd summarize at the end, is that we have users who operate our software. If we think of them that way, I didn't get in our conversation something I wanted to add, which was tests for this stuff. Like, if we're going to do it and we're going to treat it as a requirement, we should test for it too. And I hardly ever see people test for their settings and logging and input and output for these type of users. So I just want to sort of close with, think about, in order to code for a good production, think about your operators as users and put them in these are not non-functional requirements. I hate that word. These are real requirements. This is part of your product design, part of your service design. That's what I'd want to leave you with. I want to remind you, I want to remind you, Techlahoma Foundation is sponsoring 200 OK, and we would love for some more companies to sponsor the event. Call for proposals ended yesterday, so I think right now, if you're on the Techlahoma Slack, you might be able to get involved in voting for what some of the talks are. It's in June, it's in Tulsa. So the Techlahoma Twitter, what Clayton just said, Techlahoma Twitter put out the link to vote on the CFP, the call for presentations talks for 200 OK. I think I've been twice now. It's a really cool conference. I saw stuff from like how to code for web accessibility, all the way down to like to how to teach kids to code. It's not just web, CSS, and HTML. It's a pretty cool conference. One day, I think, right? He said how many days? I think it's a one-day conference still. Hey, you guys should do 2 days sometime. So please go to 200 OK. I think it's one of our upcoming conferences in Oklahoma. Sponsor Techlahoma, become a member of Starspace 46, and volunteer to speak at the Oklahoma City Java Users Group. We'd love to have more talks from our members here. We have a room on Techlahoma Slack, slack.techlahoma.org. We also have a mailing list at okcjug.org. You can subscribe and get on our email list, which is 10 years old. It's a neat little community. So thanks for coming.